raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with your hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Here we focus on helping men and those with men in their lives solve some of life's complex challenges through understanding the practices of mindfulness and how they can help. Each episode is in an environment free of judgment and criticism, with a focus on authenticity and inner peace. Let's dig in.
The primary evolutionary function of testosterone is to coordinate a male's body and behavior in the service of reproduction. To that end, early testosterone exposure in many male animals, including humans, masculizes the brain, influencing in the development of neural circuitry that is activated later in puberty. Testosterone changes everything. It changes the way the genes are expressed on every chromosome. Proteins from thousands of genes are produced in systematically different patterns and quantities in men compared to women. These proteins go on to affect the body and the brain, first in utero, again shortly after birth, and then there's another explosion of changes in puberty. Testosterone, affects body and behavior, which in turn affects one's social environment, which in turn affects one's body and behavior, and so on until death. T divides. That's a quote from our guest today, Dr. Carole Hooven, and her book, T, The Story of Testosterone, the Hormone That Divides and Dominates Us. Welcome to another episode of Men Talking Mindfulness, everyone, the podcast where we explore the intersections of mindfulness, masculinity, and personal growth. Today, we are honored to be chatting today with Dr. Carole Hooven. We're going to call her Carole today, who is studying, researching, and teaching at Harvard University for the last 17 years. Currently, Dr. Hooven is an associate.
Sorry, 20.
In the
22
What's
years.
that? 22 years.
years.
Okay. Oh, 22 years. Okay. I was reading your, I was
Old bio.
on your 22 years. And now she's currently working with the infamous Dr. Steven Pinker in his Harvard psychology department. Before joining Dr. Pinker's lab, Dr. Hooven, Carole, served as a lecturer and co-director of Harvard's undergraduate studies of human evolutionary biology. You may have heard Dr. Hooven and her work through her appearance on Joe Rogan Experience, Dr. Phil, Fox News, and other various podcasts and media outlets. Today, John and I are excited for our conversation with Carole as we examine the following aspects of testosterone and humanity. We're going to look at the biology and social impacts of testosterone across the animal kingdom, why and how testosterone dominates, how T differentiates men and women, what behaviors are driven by testosterone, and why has testosterone become so controversial, and more. Thank you, Carole, for being with us today. Really appreciate taking the time and really enjoyed so much reading your book.
Thank you so much, John and Will. And Will, you did your homework, and as you were reading that, I thought it sounded great, and I was like, wait, did I write that? That sounds awesome.
You wrote that. You did. And it was
Did I do that? Yeah, that's it. You picked. I love what you picked out. Thank you so much.
And that was like one of the closing conclusions of the book. Like it was like on the very last 20 pages of the book. I was like, here's what I can use in order to introduce the show. So we're just going to start with a little grounding practice with John, and then we're going to jump in and get to know you and your work a little bit better, Carole. And so let's just ground first. So John,
all right, let's
take
do
us
that.
away.
Yes, thanks, Will. Thanks for that great opening. Carole, great to have you here. Very excited to get in this conversation. And for our listeners and for you, Will and Carole, I'm going to lead us through just a simple 5-breath grounding practice to get us as the hosts settled and you as the listeners settled. So let's, if you're comfortable, both physically and psychologically, to close your eyes, then I invite you to do so. Otherwise, just soften your gaze and let's intentionally bring our attention to our breath. Not forcing anything, but just focusing. Noticing the inhalation and the exhalation. The rise and fall of our diaphragm. The expansion and contraction of our belly and chest. The cool air entering on the inhalation and the warm air leaving on the exhalation. One more. Deep breath in. Hold at the top and release. And as you release, bring some movement back into your body, rolling your shoulders, rolling your neck, your head, opening your eyes if they were closed. And we are here, Men Talking Mindfulness, with Dr. Carole Hooven. Very excited to get into this conversation again. Will, I'll turn it over to you, my friend, to start us off.
Right, can I just say, while that was going on, my cat came out and made an appearance.
Fantastic.
Interrupted my relaxation there.
We can do it all over. We can do it all over.
If we behind us. Okay.
That's what cats do. They
That's
must have felt like guess the cat needed to ground a little bit as well. So in the story of testosterone, the hormone that divides and dominates us, you focus specifically on the role of testosterone in human behavior. What led you to focus on testosterone, and what do you think are the most important insights that your research on this hormone has provided?
Okay, so what led me to focus on, first I came to my field, I guess, with just an interest in behavior and evolutionary sort of biological origins and influences on human behavior. I had traveled a lot before going to grad school, and just traveling and seeing the huge diversity of social and ecological cultural environments across the world just made me very curious about what accounts for both what we as humans share with each other and share with the rest of life on Earth, including non-human animals, but also what makes us different from non-human animals and from each other in terms of cultural variations and in terms of sex. So sex meaning male and female. So I really became interested in sex differences when I quit my job in software, in my software industry in my late 20s. It's a long story. I talk about this in the book. I went out to Uganda and I ran a chimpanzee research site in the jungle. And it was a interesting and fascinating and also challenging environment, not just because of the physical challenges, but also there was a lot of political upheaval and really grotesque and horrific violence occurring all around me. And this was in 1999 and 1998 and 1999. And anyone can go back and look at what happened in that part of the world then. And it was, horrific, much of it. So that was an incredible experience for me, being in the jungle with chimpanzees and watching the males who were obviously significantly more physically aggressive than the females, and the females who were nurturing and far more nurturing than the males and spent time with their kids mostly. That's a generalization. There's a lot of variance and overlap. And I just want to say, going forward, anytime I talk about sex differences, there is variation and overlap. I'm talking about population averages. There are some men who bawl their eyes out on a regular basis, and there are some women who are violent and totally stoic. So just keep that in mind, and please, nobody accuse me of mischaracterizing the capacity of males and females to show characteristics that are maybe characteristics, of the opposite sex. So the point is that it was observing patterns of behavior in the wild that were not influenced at all by human culture. And these behavioral sex differences paralleled, of course, in many ways, what we see in humans. So when I began at Harvard in what was biological anthropology and is now human evolutionary biology, I encountered what I have to characterize, and it's not only this group, but largely feminist scholars' explanations for sex differences. They were against largely against, not totally closed off to, but largely against biological explanations and pro cultural explanations that invoke something like the patriarchy. That was
Mm.
contrary to what I understood and what I have come to, even after doing my best, to entertain all kinds of explanations for human sex differences. I became convinced, and no one has yet caused me to doubt my central hypothesis, that testosterone specifically is the most important biological agent that explains our sex differences. It interacts with the environment, and that is how behavior is produced, is via a
Mm.
lifelong and very deep interaction between our genes and our environment. And the fact that in
Mm.
males have a Y chromosome generally means does mean they're going to produce sperm, on average, again, and not everyone, all males produce sperm, and testosterone. And it is testosterone that leads to the phenotypic, that is the behavior and the body
Mhm.
characteristics that differ from female characteristics in these very profound ways.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead,
what
John. Yeah.
we spoke generally there, and again, we're just going to continue to speak generally. What are those major impacts of testosterone across I love the way you phrase that, the non-human animals, because we are in that animal kingdom ourselves. What are the major impacts of testosterone across the animal kingdom?
So I should start by saying that there's a lot of controversy now, which is frustrating and I think derailing social progress and our ability to discover how the world works. There's a lot of controversy about what male and female mean. And it's because science is becoming very politicized. But male and female in evolutionary biology and in biology in general have very clear meanings that have huge amount of explanatory power in understanding how the world works and animal
Mm.
behavior. So
Mm.
males are the defined by the basically ability or body plan to produce small gametes, and in animals this is sperm. And female is the ability or body plan, again, because I'm not producing eggs anymore, but I'm still female.
Mhm.
So it's the body plan to produce large gametes or eggs. And the reason this is important is because in order to reproduce, sperm producers need to do something very different than egg producers in terms of how their body develops and how their behavior develops. And there, of course,
Mhm.
has to be a coordination between body and behavior. So if you are in the body, a sperm producing body, there needs to be a way for the body to kind of know that it is producing sperm. There's sperm are cheaper to produce than eggs. You're producing millions of sperm a day. And sperm producers, there's a long, interesting evolutionary history here, but sperm producers generally need to find the eggs or egg producers. And there is generally competition among the sperm producers to fertilize the egg producers because eggs are few and far between. They're expensive to produce. And the egg producers do not generally have to go out seeking the sperm producers. But so over evolutionary history, these sperm producers have evolved traits that maximize their capacity, depending on the species and in the environment, maximize their capacity to find and fertilize the egg producers. That coordination has to be so testosterone or a analogous form of testosterone exists across most sperm producers, and it in sort of more complex, behaviorally complex, especially social animals, will have profound effects not only on the reproductive system, and that's what it does in humans. It shapes the male reproductive system to be what I'm not going to go into all the parts, but the parts that males have as opposed to the parts that females have. but it also acts on the secondary sex characteristics to develop
Mhm.
and maintain those characteristics that emerge in puberty under the influence of testosterone that allow us to very quickly recognize a male as opposed to a female. And that would be height and broader shoulders, narrower hips, certain kind of gait, obviously more, a huge amount of enhanced upper body mass, etc. Beards, deeper voice. I could
Yeah.
go on and on. That's
Adam's
all
apple. Yeah.
testosterone. Adam's
Mhm.
apple. That's all testosterone acting on the body. So
Mhm.
evolution would not give you guys all that stuff if it did not also do something to your brain, which starts in utero, because you have to practice this stuff as kids, which you do by sometimes just beating the crap out of each other for fun. And that is called rough and tumble play. Most boys do that. Most girls do not just have their friend over and start tackling them. They're just not that into that. It doesn't, and that's across the planet. That's practice, and that's the result of testosterone acting in male bodies, but not really so much in female bodies. And then, of course, in puberty, there's also changes that, in addition to those physical changes, puberty is when testosterone transforms a boy into a sexually mature adult who is producing sperm. So in a lot of other animals which are, say, seasonal breeders, like take male birds, they're not into, or a red deer, which I write about in the
Yeah.
book. They're not into sex or females or high levels of aggression if they're not making sperm. But when the sperm is made is when the females are sexually receptive because they are fertile. That is when the males grow weapons on their heads, which are testosterone mediated, and start trying to kill each other. When there's no sperm, there
Yeah.
are no fertile females. The males chill out, hang out as bachelors, relatively peacefully, low level aggression.
Mhm.
But they're not they don't have weapons that can poke an eye out or stab their, who's somebody who was their friend sort of to death because there's a fertile female. That happens when sperm is being made seasonally. Humans are different. You guys start making sperm at puberty and stay fairly horny and aggressive for the rest of your lives. And that is because there are lots of females fertile at all different times, and you don't know when it is. In addition, you guys benefit from investing in your offspring. And that is why, and different
Mhm.
men invest to different degrees and have different kinds of reproductive strategies. But the fact that we form monogamous social bonds and semi-monogamous, actually, like mating bonds, means that the uh, need for these really high rates of aggression is reduced. And also, it's not confined to a specific season. So we can't, as a species, maintain these super high rates of aggression. Chimpanzees do have those very high rates of aggression because there's always females coming into estrus and they fight over those females, but they don't tend to kill each other unless they are trying to work together as a group to kill a male from a neighboring community, which is a whole different ball of wax. Anyway, I think I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay.
And multiple other questions. I think we can wrap up the show
Okay.
right there.
No, there's still more. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, right there, we talk about the fact that T drives us as animals. It affects our behavior. It affects our biology. It includes that behavior includes aggression, sex, risk taking. So how do you see the interplay between testosterone and these different aspects of behavior? And then what implications does this have for our understanding of human behavior more broadly?
Okay, sorry. So I just wanted to close a couple tabs because I
Sure.
noticed that, is the video a little bit blurry on your end?
The video
Yes.
does go a little bit blurry on occasion, yes, and it's okay.
Alright.
It'll clear up here shortly.
You sound
There it
fine
is.
though. I think
Okay,
it's on
good.
John's end.
So I want to make sure I understand your question. So you're asking, what is the relationship between sort of current testosterone levels and these different aspects of behavior, or how does testosterone influence these typically masculine, or not, I shouldn't say typically masculine behaviors, but behaviors that are more characteristic of men than women on average, really.
Right. Yes. That's the latter of the two. And then what does that imply for our understanding of human behavior more broadly, which I think you touched on quite a bit in the last question, but just, yeah,
Yeah.
if we could go from
Yeah, no,
there.
that's a good question. So in a bunch of different mammals that have been studied to date, and not all mammals, but mammals where males benefit reproductively from competing for females, especially. So that could be competing in the way that peacocks compete by not super aggressive fighting, but trying to influence female choice by showing off, or it could be more intense physical competition, like in the red deer. It depends on the mating system, of course. Human males are competing in very different ways, and that could just be competing socially for status by trying to be a really good baseball player or work at a hedge fund or whatever it is that can increase social status in a way that is attractive to women. It doesn't, of course, have to involve physical competition. But I should just say, our evolutionary history is one where the human physical competition among men has declined over, the expression of that has declined over time on a time scale that suggests it's not due to genetic changes over time, it's due to social changes. And that's just a shout out to the influence of culture on what we might think typically masculine behaviors are. Culture is incredibly important. But if you just, I'm really am interested in rough and tumble play, because this is a typically masculine behavior. I have a 14-year-old boy who's not an athlete. He's very creative. He likes theater. However, he loved wrestling his friends when they came over. He still does that. And it scares me now because they're getting bigger and stronger. But
Yeah.
that's really interesting, because that is, in my view, and this is controversial, but I just don't see the evidence against it. I don't see an alternative explanation. And we know that this happens in non-human animals, that juvenile males, say in chimpanzees, more than females, or take rats. It's very clear in rats because we can do experiments in rats. The males will stand up on their hind legs and kind of play fight, play box, or they'll wrestle each other. And they have stereotyped moves that have been well documented. And that's rough and tumble play for them. As far as it looks like rats are having fun, it looks like they are. And what they're learning is how to read the signals of their competitors. And all that play is, it's rewarded via a dopamine, like a upregulation in dopamine. Basically, there's motivation and reward. And there seems to be a relationship between the neural structures that testosterone um, influences the development of in utero or directly post birth, depending on the species, and the way that different kinds of environmental or social stimuli trigger a dopamine response. So that means that play is motivated and rewarded more in males than in females, and it serves an evolutionary purpose. Because
Mm.
if you deprive the animals of testosterone, so first of all, if you deprive males of testosterone in or directly post in utero or post birth, they don't engage in rough and tumble play. If you give it to females, they do. So it is obviously testosterone mediated. And then in addition, if you have a male who had normal testosterone levels in utero, and you deprive him of the ability to engage in rough and tumble play, he backs down from
Mm.
confrontation in adulthood. He will not physically defend his territory, for instance. So it is crucial for for males, and in humans, I would imagine for boys, to engage in rough and tumble play if they want to, or sorry, if they, yeah, it's harder to talk about humans because they don't express that kind of aggression. But I would say over our evolutionary history, that's been a really crucial part of behavior. Boys need to play physically. And just as an aside, I think it's a disaster that the American school systems require boys to just sit still in their seats and punish them for having the kind of energy that they do in fact have and is totally healthy and needs to be channeled, in positive ways. So that was just one example of rough and tumble play. But what's interesting about testosterone and what's consistent about it is that it has a lot to do with sex, how to get sex, and in the species where or how to get mates also. So not just sex, because some species are monogamous and males will have to compete to find a mate, but once they find her, they stay with her. And that is the best way for those males to increase their reproductive success. But in the species where it makes sense to have more than one mate, then if there needs to be physical competition, that rough and tumble play is important. And again, if it's a seasonal breeder, then testosterone rises and falls in a way that maps onto female fertility. And as it rises and falls, so does aggression, unless it's say in a bird species where male-male competition takes a different form, and that is through kind of trying to influence female choice. So in humans, it's basically permanently high after puberty, and we can't do experiments. So I can't say for sure, like I know that testosterone causes any specific behavior. However, we do have information from transgender people who transition with hormones, and it's about sex. So one thing that's not controlled in the transgender population is that males were already exposed to high testosterone in utero and females were not. However, if I did actually just start taking testosterone, which I'm happy to talk about later, at female levels.
My wife would like to know about that.
Okay, no, and I'm
sure.
happy to talk about it. But if I were to transition and take male typical levels before I grew a beard or started losing hair or developed muscles, I would become super horny, so horny that it would freak me out. And as a woman, and because I've taught, not only is this, and again, there's huge amount of variety here in what people experience, but what I have heard from talking to people over and over, and this is substantiated fairly well, the effects on libido in the scientific literature, that it's like a male puberty, and females who go through this say, oh my God. Sorry, this gets me emotional actually, because I think it's a very profound insight for women or females, or that men are not always loving the preoccupation with body parts and sex that they go through life with, and that my view is this should not be shameful, and it upsets me that it is a source of social shame, and it's associated with toxic. This word toxic behavior may be shameful and toxic, but I think that the testimony I've heard from trans men, so females again who transitioned, is that they have a huge amount of empathy for men who they used to resent for staring at their boobs. And they thought these guys were just assholes. And then they start doing something similar. And they say, okay, now I get it. It's something that I have failed to restrain. It's very difficult to restrain the desire and the fantasies. And what's interesting, sorry, I know I'm talking a lot, but what's interesting is that men, it's on top of a desire for love and to be loved and to have commitment and a rich, nurturing, loving relationship. It's just another component that women don't seem to have
Right.
and not understand that it's in addition. And that's because there are different strategies that males can use to be reproductively successful. Females also have some different strategies, but the strategy of, one night stands and having this extreme attraction to the body is just not really doesn't serve female reproduction in the way that it can serve male reproduction. And that, to me, I really do think that is testosterone mediated, partly because of the evidence from transgender people and partly from gay men who are just not
Mm.
influenced by the restraints that female sexuality imposes. They have a very masculine sexuality. They have the same amount of testosterone at all life stages as heterosexual men, and they have a typical male desire for a higher number of sexual partners, high libido, and lesbians do not. Like, it's a completely different culture. There's a reason, and it's testosterone, in my view.
It's amazing how much this all plays out. Like, I have two brothers, and God, and a lot of relatives when I was growing up, a lot of male relatives. We're always rough and tumbling and playing and and just like, and reading your book, it's like I can understand why. And I kind of already knew this. It's just something about it from a very basic behavioral and genetic level that it's like required. And then even as we get older, outside of like the adolescence, like we've had a lot of different different guests on talking about masculinity, and it's just like, so it might not show up as actual this like kind of physical play. It might not show up like in a physical realm as we get older, but it shows up in like verbal jousting amongst men. We're always like in sort of some competition or hierarchy or pecking order, especially if a woman shows up. Like, if you're just around like 5, 6, 10 men, only men, totally different conversation. You put one woman in that room, every man begins to change. And it's like, there's something about that triggering of the feminine that just begins to like, you mentioned your book, it's like we really begin to, testosterone begins and has an uptick in those circumstances, and we begin to behave differently because of the availability in those circumstances of testosterone, like being in our bloodstream. I just think it's
so you're saying when you
fascinating
say the uptick, I think you're referring to the research that shows that if there is an attractive woman that men might be sexually interested in, that can sort of ignite a competitiveness that is accompanied by, in many circumstances, especially if the men are sexually experienced, an increase in testosterone. And that happens, you could be playing chess, you could be playing tennis, you could be watching people play football, and you feel vicariously as though you're participating. You can get the same sort of vicarious competitive boost. If your team loses, or you are being overshadowed by this taller, more charismatic guy, your testosterone could start to decline. Those are the important relationships between testosterone and behavior. Your baseline testosterone predicts very little unless it's weirdly high or, abnormally low. There's not good evidence showing that highly aggressive men or libidinous men or even dominant men necessarily have higher testosterone than anybody else.
Thanks for that.
I just got to come back just to make a statement. I've got 3 kids. I've got 2 daughters and a boy. My little boy's in the middle. And my wife and I were joking last night that about 3 times of our energy is spent managing him and his aggression. He's young. He's still very young.
How old is he?
He's 4.
Give me a little taste. What are you talking about?
Oh, like jumping off of the back of the couch, or the climbing up on top of the counter in our kitchen and wanting to jump off of that. And we're like, no, buddy, that's going to hurt. He's much more like he pushes his little sister around. I'm like, hey, buddy, you can't do that. We got like,
Yeah.
hey, maybe bringing another little boy over, or when he's wrestling with dad, because I know that's a way for a father and a son to
Yes.
express some type of emotional connection is through that
Yes.
physical connection. And, that's fine, but you can't go and do what you just did to dad to your little sister. But the same thing, I just literally this weekend was talking to my wife and I was like, hey, it would be great if there was a school that had some type of physical outlet for children, not just recess, not just, running around playing tag, but almost more geared towards the more masculine, and
Yes.
where they could wrestle and what do you call it, the rough and tumble play. I think that
Yeah.
would be fantastic for them and their growth. But I also have a question, and I saw actually you tweeted about Robert Sapolsky's book, Behave.
Yeah.
And I just recently read that, maybe 3 months ago. And, there's a lot of overlap between what you guys talk about. It seems though as though Robert Sapolsky also brings in some of the other hormones that typically wouldn't necessarily be associated with some of these behaviors that you're saying are testosterone related. What I specifically was found interesting was vasopressin, one that
Yes.
Will and I have learned about in the past. But what we learned was vasopressin is the hormone that's released as we go to sleep to kind of suppress that urge to go to the restroom. But Robert Sapolsky, talks about how that is a player in our aggression.
Yes.
How do you see these two perspectives? Yours focusing almost exclusively on testosterone and the aggression, and then Robert Sapolsky's.
Yeah, so I did read Behave ages ago, and now I can't remember exactly what he said about vasopressin, but my recollection about the vasopressin literature is that it's really about variation in the vasopressin, in a polymorphism in the vasopressin receptor, unless I'm
Yeah, no, I think
mis-
that's right.
remembering. But I don't remember that being a sex difference, but that that there is differences in the receptor predict aggression and certain aspects of sexual behavior in a higher testosterone environment. And I don't know as much about how that is supposed to work. I don't come across that with great frequency really in the testosterone literature. I thought you were going to say cortisol, which is,
Yep.
I think, extremely important, dopamine and cortisol. And there's the research there is really interesting. It's just I stuck to what is what are really robust findings, and to me, just have withstood the test of time. I don't, if you noticed in the book, a lot of books do sort of point to one study here says this and one study says that, or even two or three studies. I really wanted to focus on the bodies of work that I thought were robust. And then the cortisol is interesting because it seems that in stressful situations, so cortisol is a very important hormone. It's actually a metabolic hormone. People think it's just a stress hormone, but it's only a stress hormone because it's a metabolic hormone, essentially, which means if you're in a situation that feels like you need to move your body either sort of towards something that might be scary to other people, like somebody in your face getting up to you and sticking their chest in your face. First, your cortisol is going to go up no matter what, basically. But and the cortisol goes up, and that makes basically glucose available to working muscles that you might need to fuel your fighting or fleeing, essentially. And that happens in psychological stressors too, which is really interesting. But the point is that I think interacts different, that has different effects in males and females, because in one you have a high estrogen environment and in one you have a high testosterone environment, where your testosterone might also be changing in that environment. Maybe your testosterone is going up. And for people who respond with fear and anxiety to those kinds of challenges, or self-doubt, this is actually like a fascinating literature, and it's a little bit detailed, but the idea is that if you're basically a loser because of your psychology and or your physical capacity, and you have learned that from losing previous encounters, whether they be, you know, a chess game or a baseball game or somebody's in your face, that cortisol kind of wins in future encounters where you're threatened. It's as though the cortisol goes up, the testosterone starts going down because you have fear, and the cortisol um,
Mm.
motivates a fleeing behavior and self-doubt and the psychology kind of a loser who wants to survive so they can try reproducing another day, or you know, and you can't do that as an animal if you keep sort of um, fighting opponents who are going to win, whether again it's a chess game or something physical. The same psychological response seems to be activated, and cortisol is playing a role there. I think it's complicated, and I stayed away from that a little bit in the book because I don't see that there's kind of a good consensus there in the literature. It's a
Mm.
hypothesis that there's this kind of relationship between cortisol and testosterone in humans. It's very clear in some non-human animals. Animals who lose one fight will
Mm.
have a cortisol increase in the next when they're challenged. Some certain animals, like Syrian hamsters, will have a cortisol increase and a testosterone decline, and will then like fail to defend their territory next time they're challenged.
Mm.
Um, yeah, and that can last. And I think something similar does go on in humans and can lead to depression and
Yeah.
lack of motivation. And dopamine is also involved.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Would
so
you
sorry,
say?
I'm just evading your vasopressin question because I don't know enough about it.
No, that's this is fascinating. It was really just the other hormones in general. Vasopressin is
Yeah.
just the one that stuck out to me. But now that you mentioned the loser kind of mentality and how that affects you in the future, does the reverse happen? If you win and you get that cortisol increase, is there an increase in testosterone, and does that make you more likely to fight versus flee?
Yeah. So the I I'm going to leave cortisol out of it this time because I think cortisol is playing a role. I'm not um, sure that the literature is super clear on exactly how it works, but I think with testosterone, if it's doing what it's doing in non-human animals, is that it is first of all there's evidence in non-human animals, like if you do experiments where you with rats, if you pair one side of a cage with a testosterone injection and another side with a placebo injection, the rat will prefer to go to the side of the cage that where they receive testosterone. And so it's pleasurable for them to experience a testosterone increase. And the reason, part of the reason this is interesting, because why do men fight? Like sex, we understand, you know, you can have an
Yeah.
orgasm, that feels good. But of course, that has a motivated, like one of the most motivated behaviors there is, right? It has to be. You have to
Right.
be able to. So in rats, what they do is scientists will measure how hard the rat works to get something. Men will do almost anything and obviously we have examples of this all over the place. Like some men, you know, will do horrible, horrible things to get sex. Men will devote their entire careers to getting sex, you know, having enough status so that they can trade it for sex, and they do. So
Mm.
it is something that is, it seems obvious, but once you break it down from an evolutionary point of view, it's really interesting to think about exactly how this works. And I do think that the competition piece is ultimately about sex or mate, not just sex, but acquiring a mate, like a high value mate or mates. And so that competition piece is an integral part of it. And uh, if you have a testosterone increase in a particular social situation where you're confronted, and some men like really want to go at that guy, right, who's in their face or looked at their girlfriend, and they're like, yeah, you know, like Fight Club, it feels good,
Yeah.
they want to do it. I think that is because those men have experienced testosterone increases
Mm.
as a result of a history of winning similar kinds of conflicts and similar kinds of situations. Testosterone changes the way genes are transcribed and translated into transcribed into I keep getting it backwards, transcribed and translated into proteins, and that actually changes the way that neurons communicate in the brain and the levels of neurotransmitters, and how different kinds of neurotransmitters can ultimately affect behavior. So those little testosterone bumps can change the neural circuitry, can change the way that dopamine and the amount of dopamine that is produced in a certain part of the brain in response to certain kinds of stimuli, so that individuals don't have to stop and think, do I run or do I confront this guy who's in my face when my heart is racing? It's like that,
Yeah.
because it's like, no, you want whatever you're going to get from that feels good. You go towards it rather than away from it. And I
Mm.
think that's where the real interesting action is in how testosterone molds male reproductive behavior. It's in the
Mm.
exposure to super high levels, like anywhere from 10 to 20 or more times female levels in utero and in puberty and in adulthood. But also it does something that it does not do in women. People keep looking and they are not finding it. Women do not have testosterone changes like we're seeing in males in these kinds of competition. We don't know exactly what it's doing in these situations of confrontation and competitiveness and trying to attract women. But I think it's incredibly important in conditioning different types of strategies that different types of men will use.
Yeah, I think it was comforting with some of the things as I read through the book about like you mentioned how how we men just so easily objectify women and just like and I know that I'm guilty of it, like staring at women's bodies and boobs, and it's just like, and I was like, oh my god, thank God it's not just the problem with me, it's like testosterone that's really affecting how I am in the world. Let's go into like other emotions like anger, aggression. I thought it was so interesting here. I found it fascinating. You talk about throughout the animal kingdom as well as in humans. I have a quote here: engaging in lower rates of behaviors related to empathy, like caregiving, cooperation, helping, and comforting. Which I was like, whoa! Like I am definitely I know that we're talking an average men or average kind of species here, but I thought that was like, oh wow, that's like also comforting in some ways, but also, oh wow, it's something I can definitely work on, as my human existence. So let's talk about that a little bit in the emotional realm.
Yeah, there is a sex difference there. It's not clear to me that I don't see the evidence that it is due to testosterone differences.
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised at all to see that evidence, but there's sort of in humans again, it's very difficult to attain that kind of evidence. But it does seem to me that my feeling there, and this is a feeling, is that
Mm.
it has to do with the prenatal exposure, that these are lifelong differences. And I think I'm going to say something extremely controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. So, what's one thing that's interesting about trans women, trans transgender women, so people who spent if they went through male puberty, I don't have examples yet of people who transitioned and didn't go through male puberty. There is a so those are people who change their testosterone levels in adulthood and reduce them, like block them in adulthood. But they're still male. They still went through male puberty. They still were exposed to high levels of testosterone in utero. So this is anecdotal, and I have been, and I'm saying it because I and many other women who don't always toe the
Mm.
perfect social justice line have been accused of I would have observed that some of the most aggressive trans rights activists are a certain minority of trans women who do strike many people as behaving in a very typically masculine way, even without typical levels of testosterone, like a very typical kind of masculine aggression that is fierce and very difficult to be on the receiving end of as a woman. So there's one bit of anecdotal evidence. Some other evidence comes from trans men and trans women who talk about how their ability to feel or have access to feelings of like a broad range of emotions. So what is described in general is that, excuse me, taking testosterone tends to squash one's ability to access a broad range of emotions, except for anger and frustration. And blocking testosterone increases crying, for one thing, and increases sort of the ability to verbalize, to sort of understand and verbalize what one is feeling. And this sounds funny because it's such a stereotype that men can't do that. But this is what people report. And again, it's not across the board. There are plenty, like you mentioned, I was on Joe Rogan. And if you listen to that episode, like I cry all the time. Just
You
I
both
don't,
are
like,
crying.
bawl my eyes
It's
out,
awesome.
but I tear up, right? I get really emotional a lot. Joe was tearing up pretty much every time I did. And he is jacked up with a huge amount of testosterone. And I know that for a fact. So it's not this, you know, there's a lot of variation here, but it is like this is in the literature that testosterone tends to reduce crying. My son, who's 14, has recently basically stopped crying. He used to cry the normal amount. Like there's not a big sex difference in crying in kids, but that when the testosterone goes up, the crying goes down and the risk taking and competitiveness and status consciousness goes way up. In males. In girls, there's a status consciousness, but it's not as in your face, of course. It's more, you know, kind of backstabby, passive aggression. And that's very well documented. And it's cruel. So this elevating the femininity, I'm not into that. The typical female way of competing is cruel. It's crueler than going up to another guy and saying, "Hey, you fat slob." I have some respect for that. You know, say it to his face. Let him punch you. If he's going to punch you or whatever's going to happen, you're going to resolve it and it's over. So let's just remember that there are typically feminine ways of competing and there are typically masculine ways. What is bad is the tail end of male aggression, which is the few men, you know, who are extraordinarily aggressive, who do almost all of the, you know, murdering and, you know, serious physical assaults. That's not most men, but it is almost all men. And you could say that about any male trait because their male distribution of traits is a much sort of flatter curve where you have way more at the high end and way more at the low end. And females are more likely to sort of cluster around the middle.
So should we, you know, I have, John, anything else?
Yeah, just I know we're coming up on time, so I want to respect your time.
I can give you a couple more minutes, but
great.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
And you know, we hear a lot about menopause, but in your book you address andropause. Can you explain to our audience what that is and the impacts of that?
Yeah. So I think I said that menopause is like falling off a cliff and andropause is like, or I don't know, maybe I didn't say that. Sorry. I said that somewhere. And andropause is like a slow, you know, going slowly down a hill. However, I just have to say, I know it's all men watching your show or listening, or mostly men, and hello to the women out there. And so to the women out there, to any men who are interested, I am 57 and I recently just, I don't know, 6 months ago or something, had my ovaries surgically removed. Oh, that's called an oophorectomy. I don't need to believe me. You don't want to hear the reasons. I didn't have cancer, but that was like falling off a cliff because it turned out I wasn't actually in menopause. I thought that it's complicated, but all kinds of things change. And I'll just say to the world, I'm sure my husband will love this. My sex drive just went out the window. Like, and that's why I'm on testosterone now, because it totally plummeted. And I did write in the book, and here I might have to update my view on this, although this is only anecdotally. I wrote in the book that was not convinced by the evidence that testosterone helps menopausal women in terms of their sex drive, and I still don't see strong evidence there. And I was pretty convinced that if there is an effect, it's via estrogen, because women who don't have any testosterone but who do have high estrogen seem to have typical sex drive. There's a lot of evidence there. But anyway, so I'm taking testosterone. I do think something's going on there in terms of sex drive.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
No, I think, but who knows? It could be placebo. All of this could be placebo, but my energy seems through the roof. I seem to have a mental clarity I did not have before. So if I'm making any sense, I blame it on the testosterone. No, and I feel like I just saw this video of like these soccer. Sorry, this is super embarrassing. I told my son in the car this morning, this video of these soccer players where in slow motion, where one guy was jumping up like jumping up to headbutt a ball. And he was jumped so high and it was so beautiful. And his body, I was like, holy shit, he is beautiful. Like his body, and maybe I would have thought this before, but the young male, like athletic body is the greatest. The strong, like athletic. But
Powerful.
Before, I'm not sure I would have given a crap. Anyway, so that could be testosterone, it could be placebo. And so andropause is complicated because while this male sex drive does go down over time, so it's certainly highest when testosterone is highest, which is when there's the highest degree of competition for mates, which is interesting, and it's actually not right during puberty. It's a little bit on the later end of puberty and in the late teens, early 20s, early 30s. And then there can be a plateau and then it just gradually declines. I should say it doesn't do this in every part of the world. We Western men who are very well nourished have much higher testosterone levels than like healthy hunter-gatherers who can be very, very healthy through old age and don't have the kind of obesity and heart conditions and all this stuff that we Western men have, which confounds, in my view, the ability to discern whether it is testosterone itself that is responsible for the declines in energy and mood and clarity and sex drive and aggressiveness that decline over age. And also if you're with the same woman, you both are getting older, your bodies are getting older. If what I think we need to show is that if you keep trading wives or mates, does your sex drive go down? My prediction is not that much. So because we know that for men, this is the Coolidge effect, where a new novel female can really increase dopamine for one thing, and the ability to get an erection and have and ejaculate essentially after the male feels like he's sexually exhausted. That can happen in the short term, I think, and in the long term. And males experience that more than females, which in why pornography for men, there's constantly new females, new positions, new this, new that, where pornography more for women is about more about getting to know an actual story and maybe some character development. Sorry. So andropause is I think it's complicated.
It sounds like there's a nature versus nurture as well, in the sense of like taking care of your body,
nature.
Working out, increases.
But it's a real thing. Yeah. It's not as easy to put on muscle when that's one of the biggest effects is on muscle. And it's harder to put on muscle when testosterone goes down. And I do think there's an effect on mood and energy that's clearer than potentially the effect on aggression, which is hard to find because most men are not physically aggressive to start with. So how do you even get those results? Most men aren't like, yeah, I got in a fewer bar fights this month or whatever. Like that doesn't, you can't really do that in the lab.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell that. Like, I can tell that there's less aggression in me, and I can also tell
Oh,
that.
really?
Oh, for sure,
And it's not through
100%.
your family and having kids?
That's exactly
Okay.
where I was going with that. Is that I think one of the other causes of that, and maybe a cause in my decrease in testosterone, is having children.
Well,
You
having a
know,
mate and having
yeah,
kids, so your testosterone does go down. And I do think that's the effect is really on psychology. You're not as attentive to other males and increasing to the degree that you want to increase status. It's for your family.
yeah,
And, I wrote about in the book about male birds who have to, for their kids to survive, they have to cooperate with, I was going to say wife, they have to cooperate with their mate who's, sitting on the eggs. The male has to bust his ass all day long, going and getting worms and spiders and whatnot, and back and forth and back and forth, a huge amount of work. Like it's incredible to watch. If you ever, we have nests in our yard, and to watch the birds, the males mostly all day long, work so hard for their kids. And they have, if you shoot them up with higher levels of testosterone, the levels that they needed when they were searching for a mate and trying to defend their territory so that they could have a female who has a nest. If you shoot them up with testosterone after their testosterone has declined because they became fathers, which also happens in humans, they neglect their kids and they go
wow,
out resting with other males and their kids starve and die.
wow,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's super interesting, these fluctuations. So
Yeah.
that's what it's about, is the fluctuations, which granted aren't seasonal, but do
Right.
regulate male reproductive, where energy goes. I should just want to say before we finish that it's all about directing how men use energy relative to women. Women have estrogen, which puts fat on our bodies. That is energy that we need because we're growing the kids with our bodies, our
hmm
uterus and our boobs, and what we eat is converted into making the human. You guys have to compete for the ability to get the women to make the human, so you have muscles and you have more aggression and a higher libido. That's what the hormones are doing. Thank you.
Wow.
there you
Yeah,
go.
no, thank you. And I remember you mentioned that in the book. In lizards, they did the same thing. They kind of,
Yes.
gave more testosterone, and they were just, fucking like crazy and completely like
And
actually they burnt
themselves
themselves
starved to
out.
death. They
Yeah,
themselves did not survive because they were like, no, I need to go get sex. And they got eaten by predators or starved to death because they're looking for sex. Oops.
yeah, it's like that they spent all their energy looking for sex. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's like, I mean, it's like, it's amazing. Like to go beyond, the need to survive. That's how powerful testosterone
Well,
is.
testosterone is not about
The last thing I
survival.
have
Yeah.
is okay, right? It's reproduction.
Yes.
Is so much about. I mean, is that correct? Yeah, it's about
Yes.
reproduction. Yeah, that's what I
Yeah.
mean. So it's like, the reproductive qualities of testosterone kind of go in the face of our need to survive as a species.
Well, it's
Or that's
part
how
of why
powerful it
men
can
die
be.
younger. Men do take more physical risks. And sorry, I just had to say from
Yeah.
what you said before about empathy. Yes, females have more empathy, but men will just risk their lives to save the lives of others. So it's not like they have emotional, cognitive empathy, but they will just use that physical risk taking to be heroic in ways that benefit everyone, like going to war, for one thing, that everybody
Yeah.
takes for granted, that that's males dying for the rest of us. That's men, mostly men. Of course, women are doing it too, but
Yeah.
that's mostly men.
Well, last thing, it's like you dedicated this book to your son Griffin. What do you hope he and his generation will gain from all your hard work and studying testosterone and writing this important book?
Well, it is frustrating because I'm not sure where we're headed. But one thing that I hope we will gain is that reality exists. Okay. And I wish we could understand that it's going to be there regardless about what we think about it, what we say about it, what we write about it. If we can understand reality and discuss it and challenge each other, that is the way to social justice, because that's the way to solve our problems. That's the way to increase human flourishing, is through learning and knowledge. And obviously, compassionate, cooperative people are going to do better than people who are not. And that involves listening and empathy, and that involves knowing what people's experiences are.
Well, Carole, thanks so much for this enlightening episode and everything that you've shared with us. For our audience, if they wanted to get a hold of you or find out more about you, what's the best way for them to do that?
So my website, which does need some updating, is carolehooven.com, and that's Carole with an E on the end. And I'm at Hoovlet on Twitter, and I'm struggling to post to Instagram, but I'm trying to do better about that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then the book is The Story of Testosterone, the hormone that dominates and divides us.
Should have that covered. One second.
Where is it?
She's going to hold it up, Will.
Wait, I have it.
There it is.
Well, I don't know. This one.
Will's run off to La La Land.
Okay. Oh yeah, you got it too. Of course.
All right, you got it.
Okay.
Nice.
Sorry for not throwing this up there earlier. This is, from cover to cover, it's a great read, and I really enjoyed.
Thank you so
nerding
much.
out on biology and testosterone, and I really appreciate your time, Carole. You've really put so much work into this, and you really took a lot of time to write a book that's engaging and not just it's didactic and biological. So it was actually a good read. So if anyone wants to learn about testosterone and kind of dive deeper into this conversation that we've had with Carole, I'd really suggest getting the book for sure.
And I am gonna finish it, Carole, by the way.
You do whatever you want to do. It's fine.
No, I find it fascinating. So thank you for
do
writing
an audiobook. I auditioned. They have you audition 3 different people.
Yeah.
And people love my narrator. She was fantastic. So if you don't want to read it, just listen to it while you're out for your run or lifting.
There you go.
There you go.
Lots of great stories in the book too, which I enjoyed. That helped move the narrative along. It was
great.
Tons of great science. It was, thank you,
Nice.
Carole.
Thank you.
All right, Will, you want to close us up with a closing practice, man?
Yeah, let's just do a few breaths, everybody, just to kind of ground our conversation today, ground ourselves to maybe, live more fully in the next moment. We'll just take a few breaths here. Let's take a nice big exhale out. Try to hit body empty completely, and take a big inhale through the nose. And then a nice long, slow exhale out. Let's do 2 more in. Long, slow, very deliberate exhale. We'll just do 1 more of those in. Let it go. And there we are.
All right. Well,
awesome.
Thank you all. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Carole, for being on this show today, and for you tuning in, whether it's via video or via podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we hope that you've enjoyed this. If you have enjoyed this or found it enlightening, please share it with your friends, your family, or anyone you feel needs to hear this message. And we thank you again for tuning in. Until next time, take care and peace.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Peace. Thank you, Carole.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you walk away with some new tools and insights to guide you on your life journey. New episodes are being published every week, so please join us again for some meaningful discussion. For more information, please check out mentalkingmindfulness.com.